Hello Flash Johnson, welcome to possibly the best offer in terms of tanks in Blitz history, and that is because it's not only one of the best tier 8 premium tanks, it is the two best tier 8 premium tanks in the same bundle. Now, a lot of the times Wargaming sells a new tank that comes out of crates for 15k, but what if they're selling two of the best for 7.5k each? That is the AMX M4 and the T54E2. Now, times 5 boosters, unfortunately, are useless because they only apply to the tank. You get pointless order with it that you can get some boxes for. Dumb, but whatever. This is one of the best bundles they've ever released, right? And in this case, the most profitable actually does apply because these two vehicles are very, very good. And that's a bundle that, if you don't have anything else, if this is the only premium tanks you buy, then these are the ones it should be. Now, what you also have is you have these gold boxes, right? For 20 bucks, you can get both of them. And you have 1,000 gold spare as well. In that case, that is a very, very good deal. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and special thank you to my channel members as well. Thank you very much for your support. Now, why do I say these two are the best tier 8 premium tanks? Now, because they're pretty much for everyone. 90% of people are going to do something with these vehicles. They're very easy to play. They're very, very high-performing vehicles. They can do extremely well. They don't especially have any weaknesses that are massively obvious. Obviously, the entire package isn't overpowered. However, they have a good gun. They got solid aim time, solid dispersion. Obviously, some have better, some have worse, but they're definitely in the upper half of everything. Mobility is also quite solid for them, and you have 10 degrees of gun depression for both of them with very good turret armor that do have cupolas. Yes, that is a weak spot. However, you can hide them and you can wiggle them quite well. So essentially, the overall package is what carries these vehicles. There is nothing they can't do, so except maybe side scraping on the AMX, but they're very strong vehicles overall. Now, there are things like the 112-2 that are very, very strong as well, and the Object 2 FTU. However, they don't have the gun depression. They do have more armor though, so they are more noob friendly. But if you're a semi-experienced player, then a T54E2 and the AMX M4 is the best thing you can pretty much get in the game. Let's first look at the AMX, and the reason it can't side scrape is this plate right here, which is very common in a lot of French vehicles. Obviously, if you try to side scrape it, this thing becomes very flat. So you want to have this thing frontal as possible. Ideally in a hold down situation, because otherwise the front plate can be penned with tier 8 premium ammunition. However, that is true for a lot of tier 8 tanks. The combination of all factors makes this thing special. Now, the cupola is relatively high, so if you're using a 10 degrees of gun depression, you can still be shot into the cupola. However, with the gun that is very good and the mobility that is very solid, you can wiggle it back and forth to essentially minimize the risk of someone actually hitting that cupola, because, mind you, if you have a weak spot, the enemy actually has to hit it first. And it is pretty small, and you can wiggle this thing back and forth. And a turret in that kind of situation is essentially impenetrable, except for a few tiny spots that are going to be very difficult to hit, which is true for any other tank as well. So, armor on the MX is very solid. I wouldn't try to angle it to the side. Keep it frontal, keep it pointing at the enemy, and then you have your best chance at working it out. And obviously, if someone bounces off like this, then it's also going to work. But then, if you turn this to the side, you have this plate, and you have side armor that isn't very strong. Now, the T54E2. Turret again, same story, pretty much impenetrable in most cases. You have a cupola on top. If you use your 10 degrees of gun depression, this one hides it even better than the AMX. So you're going to have a hard time penning that, especially because the angles on it are quite funky, so you can only really pen it right in the middle. And if you wiggle the turret back and forth, if you peek quickly, you're going to be pretty much impenetrable. Front plate as well, pretty much impenetrable. It's a very angled shape to it, so you're not going to be able to pen that. Lower plate is quite big, so you ideally want to hide that at all times. Side scraping, again, isn't going to be too great because you have the turret ring stuck on this piece here that can be penned from the side. However, 70mm is going to be enough to get some random bounces off the side, which is definitely very nice. It's obviously not super heavy armor on these vehicles, but that is not what they're supposed to be. They have armor that is above average, and that is exactly the point. The gun's above average, the armor's above average, and the mobility is above average for what they are, and that's what makes them so good. And now a bit more about the Progetto as well. It's a very solid tank, however, it requires a lot of skill. So while this is a very good bundle as well, I'm not a big fan of it, per se, because you combine 3 tanks that are completely different. However, it is a better deal than the 15k bundle. Gotta say that. So if you want the Progetto as well, this is again a pretty good bundle. However, it is an individual offer that not everyone is going to get. And it is also not going to be suited everyone, because the Progetto is a vehicle that, again, has very bad penetration on its standard rounds and is very, very difficult to play. One of the reasons for buying premium tanks is to earn credits, and one of the ways to earn credits is to do more damage. Obviously, the credit coefficients of both of these tanks are pretty high, so that is a good sign, and they're also very, very good at doing a lot of damage, which means that good credit coefficient and high damage is going to get you a lot of credits, and that's exactly what you want to have. And combine that with a playstyle that is relatively straightforward, as in you stick it on a ridgeline and you wait for the enemy to peek and then you shoot him in the face. That is going to work out pretty damn well. However, if you're not necessarily on a ridgeline, then it's going to work as well, because you have the accuracy, you have the aim time, you have the DPM that is also above average. So there is nothing really bad about these tanks. The only weaknesses of them is that they're not good enough at any, like, they're not amazing at anything, basically. They don't have one outstanding factor, really. However, they're good at everything, which is what you want, because Blitz is a very dynamic game. There's a lot of stuff going on. So the more situations a tank is useful in, the easier it will be for you to consistently do damage. Now, let's have a look at the Challenger. There we go. Now, what do you think about the tank ranks? Unfortunately, we have a lot of high rank players here, which is never a good sign. Like, what I tend to do is, whenever I see a rank 50 player, I'm like, okay, I can't rely on that guy. That guy is not a good player. Because in most cases it is, because if you're that irresponsible with your credits, you're probably not going to be very responsible in your game either. Now, U75TS camping up there, which is another solid vehicle. Now, you do have the Object 2FTU and the 112-2. So if you're more of a fan of the Russian-style heavy tank, then, well, that's the one for you. In terms of medium tanks, there is only really 2 that I would consider really must-have, and that is the Chimera and possibly a Centurion 5-1. The rest of them, I mean, who the hell wants a Panther 88 or a Panzer 58? Those are not going to be any useful in terms of making crits. Most of the time, the heavy tank in tier 8, the tier 8 heavy tank, in most cases, is vastly superior than the tier 8 medium tank, because of Wargaming's balance decisions there. So, yeah. Anyway, let's use the gun depression here, and against the 112 Glacial, which is sometimes very cheap, but again, not very good. So, let's see, I'm going to push forward. The G-Saurus having a fun time there. The Glacial doesn't really know what to do with his tank. Instead, now he is pushing himself into 3 enemies at the same time. And we're going to be very happy to deliver off that. I'm going to take a shot there, but let's take him out. Now, the average damage is lower, obviously, than that of a lot of the Russian style of heavy tanks, like a 112 or a 112-2. So that is something that you have to watch out for. You don't necessarily want to trade with those kinds of vehicles. And they are also better at side scraping, obviously, because the side armor on those tanks is a lot stronger. Now, if you prefer that kind of playstyle where you don't have gun depression, but you have a better side armor and you can side scrape, then a 112-2 is then the best option for you. However, other than that, if you prefer a more dynamic, medium-like gameplay, which in my opinion is better, because obviously side scraping is mostly useful in a city, which is where you don't want to go. You don't want to go in most maps. You don't want to go into the city part, because the city part is often quite bad, so you don't want to do that. However, the 112-2 is another great option that is definitely worth considering if you're not too big of a fan of hull-down playstyle. However, if you don't mind, then this is the tank for you, and so is the AMX. Now, which one of the 2 is better? If you only want to buy one. Obviously, if you buy one of the 2, you're paying a bit extra for each, because the price is 8.5k gold, in the bundle it's 7.5k. So if you only want one, then make it the TF-42, because that is the better one of the 2, slightly. So let's have a look at the AMX as well. I would recommend getting the bundle. They're both fantastic vehicles, and as you can see, random game, just like that, 3k damage, quite easy. Now, another thing this tank is great at dealing with, and so is the T-42, is higher tier battle. This tank is not a tank that's going to be afraid of a tier 9, and it's still going to be some reasonably competitive against the higher tier vehicle. Now, obviously, brawling with a 50 TP in a vehicle like this is a pretty bad idea, because the thing is, these tanks are specialists at doing a bit of everything. They're not like a mouse where you block damage, or they're not like a Vickers where you just run around and get active damage somewhere. These are tanks that are pretty much good at everything, and they can do a bit of everything as well, which is why if you're facing a specialist in the specialist's element, you might have a bit of a problem, which is why you still want to have a bit of skill, right, to know when to fight someone and to know when to not fight someone, obviously. Because if you're now going to face hug a VK100 in this thing, you're not playing it right, obviously. So you still have to know the specifics of the playstyle of this vehicle, which is basically ideally in a hold down position, but you can make this thing work at pretty much anything. But if you have to give this thing a specialist role, it would be sort of dynamic hold down playstyle. So now, let's have a look at the KV-4 here. Premium penetration on both tanks and the standard penetration is also very strong. That is another very important thing. You want to be able to penetrate the enemy effectively, and especially on a premium tank, you want your standard rounds to do that 230 millimeters on this vehicle, which is plenty enough to go through most tanks. You can see right there, lower plate of a KV-4, straight goes through. Because obviously, if you're making credits, then you want to shoot standard rounds as much as possible. Because if you shoot premium rounds, you make a lot less credits. And that is another thing that these tanks are absolutely excellent at, and which is why a lot of tier 8 premium medium tanks lag behind, because they just lack the penetration. You have to fire a lot more premium rounds. So you have that. Now, let's see whether we can get the 50 TP, who is stock, right through the lower plate, just like that. Penetration is excellent. There is essentially no big weakness about this vehicle. It's good at anything, really. And that is what makes it so damn special and makes it very, very universal. Which means, if you buy this thing, there is going to be very few people that aren't going to get something out of it. Obviously, there is always going to be someone that doesn't like a certain type of tank. However, there are going to be very few people with an AMX M449 or a T-42 that are going to be like, ugh, I hate this playstyle, it sucks. Because you can adapt it to a lot of different styles, and it's going to work in a lot of situations. Got HE rounds as well, another 3K right there. It is that damn easy. These two vehicles are absolutely amazing. And if you only buy 2 premium tanks ever in World of Tanks Blitz, then you have 3 options. You have the AMX M449 and the T-42. You have the Object 2 FTU and the WZ-112-2, the Chimera, and the Centurion 5-1. My personal choice would be these 2. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.